When Peyton first got alopecia, she was 8. She was still figure skating back then, and she thought the little cat ears on her forehead were from the headband she was wearing. Her dermatologist was the one to diagnose her with alopecia areata, and the bullying she endured throughout her childhood was not as hard to stomach in comparison to the fact that people around her just did not know what to do with her and her condition. According to the National Library of Medicine, as of August 2017, around 160 million people across the world will experience alopecia areata, more commonly known as hair loss, at some point in their lifetimes. Anyone can have alopecia, with the disease being most prevalent in younger demographics, as 80% of patients can show signs of symptoms by age 40 and 40% can experience symptoms by age 20. Alopecia not only impacts millions of people's health and physical appearance, but also in the advancement and development of treatment and medicine. For many of us in this room here today, treatment is an important aspect of hair is an important aspect of who we are as individuals. Hair is what we would consider a defining aspect of our cultures, our beliefs, and our personalities. And in the same way that we would care for both the mental and physical health of our bodies, so too should we be able to care for the physical appearance of such. In today's speech, I'll be going over alopecia and treatment into 3 main talking points. Firstly, I'll be going over alopecia, its functions, and its impacts on our health. Secondly, I'll be going over treatment in these various forms and applications. And thirdly, I'll be going over alopecia treatment and both the negative and positive implications of treatment. So let's help each other become more informed about what alopecia is and how it truly affects people. Now, according to the National Alopecia Foundation as of January 2024, alopecia is described as a genetic autoimmune skin disease. This is the result of the body's own immune system, often via mutation, to attack its own hair follicles. Over the course of several weeks, hair will begin to slowly thin out on a person's head until it eventually detaches from the pores altogether, often in the face and scalp, and uncommonly in areas of the legs and arms. Alopecia's defining look is often in the form of circular, coin-like patches, almost dead spots, on a person's head in mild cases. But in more severe cases, it can result in a person losing all of their hair in total. Now, according to research from the JAMA Network, women are more likely to suffer from alopecia than men are, and that certain ethnicities, including Black, Hispanic, and Asians, are also more likely to suffer from alopecia. The article also entails that in certain regions of the world, Central Africa, East Asia, and humid climates across the United States, are more commonly likely to have alopecia. Now, with the nature of alopecia being an autoimmune skin disease that only affects the hair follicles, this means that for most individuals, alopecia is not a life-threatening disease. It doesn't cause physical pain to the body, and most patients are typically healthy and can live through it just fine. However, there can still be mental and psychological effects from alopecia, as patients will often experience mental tolls as a result of witnessing their own physical deterioration from alopecia. And so now that we've gone through alopecia and how it works as a disease, we can now go into exploring the various forms of treatment for alopecia and their application. Now, the process for alopecia recovery is straightforward. With alopecia only being an autoimmune disease, this means that for most patients, the disease will eventually begin to regress within about a year, and that a patient's hair can start to regrow without the need of medical treatment. Now, while medical treatment is not a necessity for alopecia, treatment can still be a beneficial factor in the recovery process for alopecia, as patients recovering from alopecia can often deal with issues regarding hair thickness, hair length, or bald spots. Now, this brings us into the topic of hair treatment, or treatment options. Now, from a research article titled Treatment Options for Androgenic Alopecia, published by the National Library of Medicine in 2022, it describes the various forms of treatment that are publicly available in the United States and the research that has been put into them. Treatment can be divided into 3 main categories: topical therapies, oral medications, and experimental treatments. Topical therapies are commonly the forms of medical formulas that are often applied to one's direct scalp, with the purpose of opening up the pores and directly stimulating hair growth within them. Then there's also oral medication, typically the form of countertop medication that are often in the form of pills that are then dissolved in a person's bloodstream to affect the body's own immune system. And then there are also experimental forms of treatment. This would often, these are not as common or publicly available as topical or oral medication, but they can still interesting to note about as they represent the potential and growing possibilities of alopecia treatment. This includes things such as hormonal therapy, which is when, similar to TRT, it can change the body's own hormone levels to affect hair growth. Then there's also laser therapy, things such as thermal rays being used on a person's scalp, being directly applied for hair growth. Now, from that article by the National Library of Medicine, as well as articles published by the Cultural Library in 2023, it found that the time length for alopecia patients often takes around 4 to 6 months for patients to start noticing their hair to grow back in. But for the hair to remain permanently attached to a person's head, it often takes around 12 to 18 months of consistent medical usage before medication is no longer needed. And so now that we've gone through alopecia treatment and their application, we can now go into exploring both the positive and negative implications of treatment today. Starting off with the positive implications. One of the main positive implications is that treatment can often be fast forward and fast acting. Now, once patients get the prescribed medication, they can start to see their hair regrow quickly. From an article published by PubMed in 2018 evaluating a drug called minoxidil, it found that within a 4-month period, patients saw nearly a doubling or tripling of the total hair follicles as a result. And that surveys published by researcher Alfredo Fonzi found that most onlookers and observers saw a noticeable difference in the total amount of hair on patients taking minoxidil. Now, another positive implication of treatment is that treatment is often flexible and has a lot of availability for patients. Now, with alopecia being an individualized issue that can have different severity levels, this means that with the variety in application for alopecia, this means that patients can have more control over the various aspects they want to control in alopecia. Whether this is in costs, possible side effects, or in time length, patients can exert more control over how they want to approach treatment. Now, going into the negative implications of treatment. One of the main negative implications is with side effects. For example, an article published by the National Library of Medicine in 2020 found that one drug that they were researching, finasteride, saw 3 to 15% of male participants suffer from signs of sexual side effects, including decreased libido and erectile dysfunction. And a separate article published by Benedict found that one of the more common side effects of alopecia treatment is often skin irritation in the scalp and skin. And these can be noticeable to point out when evaluating the side effects for patients. Now, a different negative implication is with the research inconsistency. For example, in this year, a researcher named Maria Bossler in January of 2025 ran an experiment to see if combining different therapies, topical therapy and experimental laser therapy, would have any noticeable impact on the end result for patients. And it made the conclusion that there was not a noticeable impact by the end of the experiment. But this directly contrasts a different experiment published 8 days prior by Hans Johnson that ran a similar experiment but made the direct opposite conclusion, that it did significantly change the result as a whole. Now, while this shouldn't undermine the decades of research that have been put into alopecia treatment, this can still be interesting to note about, as it could potentially warrant the shadow of doubt over the true efficiency of treatment. Now, a third broader negative implication of treatment is with its contributions in the rise of what's known as medical tourism. Medical tourism is the phenomenon in which citizens from Western countries such as the United States and the European Union travel to much poorer regions of the world, including Turkey and Morocco, for the distinct purpose of finding cheaper medical treatment. Whether this is in the form of lower wait times, shorter costs, or public availability, this is especially prevalent in hair transplants and alopecia treatment. A research article published by MetaHair in 2024 found that the total hair transplant market values at over $9.5 billion, and that in a country like Turkey, they do over a third of all international hair transplants. Not only are there concerns about the possible circumventing of regulations and control of the alopecia treatment, but there's also a clear defining negativity surrounding this that represents the alopecia treatment. That as the market continues to grow and that research is put into the treatment, it also means that the market becomes much more vulnerable, as companies can take advantage of this global need or desire by patients wanting to recover from treatment as a whole. And so now that we've gone through both the positive and negative implications, we can now comb over back into a conclusion. In this speech, I've gone over alopecia and how it functions as a disease. We've gone over the various forms of treatment of alopecia, and now we've gone over both the positive and negative implications of treatment today. Though alopecia still remains prevalent across the world, it is with these advancement in treatments that we've seen a significant decrease in alopecia as a whole. With the rise in treatment and research and technology, we can see that people are finally fighting back against a disease that has affected millions of people across the world. And so when we think back to the little girl Peyton, we'll know that while her childhood and many others were taken away by alopecia, her and many others today with modern medicine will be able to take back their adulthoods.